Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. The sound of a clanging can shook Naruto from his question. Whatever, at least it all worked. Swiftly, the blonde grabbed all of the scrolls he could get from the store. It had quite a few of them too. Enough to fill up a whole backpack. That said, he would have to come back on a second, third, or even fourth trip. Some of the scrolls were too big to fit in a backpack. Still, with what he had, he got to work. He sealed up all the kunai, shuriken, weapons, swords, tags, and other supplies from at least 3 or 4 shinobi stores. Good thing the space inside a storage seal could hold at least a closet full of stuff. That made this venture a lot easier. That said, Naruto began to notice that he hadn't been dreaming or hallucinating. The outline of the storage scrolls started turning green whenever he used his chakra on them. He knew because one had a red design on it. Once he filled it with his chakra, it turned green. He had no answers to why this was the case, but he couldn't stop now. After some time, Naruto decided to take a break. He downed some water and snacked on a bento far away from the shinobi district. He had just finished his lunch when he shivered. "Help me," a voice called, its voice carried by the wind. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki glanced left. He then glanced right. He saw nothing for miles. "Help me." The young shinobi jumped when he heard a metal trash can fall from around the corner. He stared at the trash can. There were bite marks on it. He then heard something fall over in the distance. Naruto quickly grew concerned. He felt something was wrong. Despite his desire to help or his hope at finding survivors, Naruto worked his brain hard. He couldn't do this stupidly or like he usually would. He had to be careful. He quickly packed up his things and stood up. He then entered the streets once again. He pulled up the gas mask he found in one of the shinobi stores and slowly entered into the valley of death that was the deeper parts of the shinobi district. Due to the mask, Naruto's breath echoed through his ears. Each step, a trudge through some type of body part that he couldn't name. He had his hand on his kunai pouch constantly. He carried over 1,000 weapons in scrolls. Yet, he did not feel safe. In fact, he felt less safe than back in the stadium. Naruto couldn't explain why, but, deep in this dusty mist, eyes were on him. No, it wasn't like back in the stadium. It was something more sinister, primal, unhindered. The feel of 1,000 eyes on him as he moved. "Help me," the voice called. Its sound was like a cold blade on the back of a hot neck. Ever since Naruto had rescued Ayame, he made conditions for himself. 3 conditions that he hoped would keep him alive. 3 conditions that told him if he could stay or run. He inhaled and exhaled. His breath was not, but the wind was cold. Naruto felt his foot squish against something wet, but he was too afraid to look down at it. The kunai in his hand shook from the unease he felt in his body. The dust grew thicker. The sounds of the storms, though he was outside, sounded so far away. The young Uzumaki stopped. In the middle of the road, where mountains and hills of shinobi corpses laid, he heard something clawing against the stone walls in the distance. The dust was thick. It was so thick he couldn't even see through it despite channeling chakra through his eyes. "Help me," the voice called. This time, it sounded familiar, eerily familiar. In a moment of nervousness, Naruto got out of the middle of the streets. He dashed into one of the alleyways. With his back pressed against the wall, he swallowed the unease in his throat. His grip on the kunai's handle was nigh suffocating. Sweat poured down the side of his face. What if there's more of those things out there? Everyone's dead. The memory of Ayame's words made him shudder. He wasted no time. He wrapped an explosion tag around a kunai. He tried not to make any noise. More than that, he hoped the wind would cover his tracks. He grabbed a shuriken. He saw a can in the distance. He threw the shuriken and quickly hid behind his spot. The weapon struck the can with a resounding smack before it fell to the ground. He heard nothing except for the sound of claws scratching on stone. It sounded just like that way one of those female teachers at the academy scratched the chalkboard with their nails. He peeked around the corner again. There it went. It was fast, but Naruto saw it. Something on 4 legs, with an arched back, and crooked hands sped through the sand. It was too far away to accurately tell, but the Kyuubi Jinchuriki knew that it wasn't human. What was that? Naruto thought. He weighed his options. At this point, he'd been given enough incentive to call it quits for one day. He didn't necessarily need to extend his hand even further. However, if he could gather information and observe the surroundings, then that would make it easier to come back here later. He quietly took out his map. The Konoha Bank was further that way. That was also where the more expensive and top-grade shinobi items laid. If he, Ayame, and Kurenai ever did leave Konoha, then the jewels, gems, and ryo stored in the bank might become valuable trading goods with people outside the village. Granted, Naruto didn't have much business sense, but even he understood how many men lost their lives over money. He saw it all the time as he grew up around the red light district. Drunks, gamblers, prostitutes, drug addicts waiting for their next fix, all ruined themselves for money. The bank of a population the size of Konoha, it was worth the risk. Alright, I'll stay for now. Plus, I should investigate that call for help. But why didn't that person I saw in the distance respond to the... Naruto stopped his thought. His eyes widened. He felt something wet soak into his clothes. At first, he thought it was rain. Knowing what he knew now, the rain would have been a gift from Kami herself rather than this. No, what landed on his shoulder was slick, gooey, and sticky. It looked like black saliva. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki's first instinct was to run, to turn his head and see what caused the stuff dripping on his shoulder, but he didn't listen. In fact, he did the craziest thing. Whether by his fear, or the primal instincts within him, he stood still. Against the wall, he did not move. He could hear the beat of his own chest through his gas mask. The enclosed space around his head felt claustrophobic. RRRRAAEEK. Naruto's ears picked up a new noise. This was no animal's noise. It was a sound he had never heard before. The sound of claws crawled on the wall beside him. The alleyway in front of him felt tight. Blood pumped from his brain to his chest. Heal LLLP me. The blonde heard the cry for help over the hot air. He tried to tune it out. He closed his eyes. He wanted to steady his breathing. If he didn't, he feared that whatever was around him would hear the sounds in his chest. Slowly, the sounds stopped. Naruto opened his eyes. Do not ask him how he didn't scream that day. Perhaps the horror was so great it robbed him of his voice. Perhaps the depths of his mind hadn't processed the warped creature in front of him. Perhaps nothing could surprise him anymore. That last one was up for debate. Either way, the young genin was not prepared to handle the creature that stood in front of him. It had no eyes. Its face was covered by what looked like some excess skin from its forehead. What passed for a mouth was a series of long, black hair-like tissues that flapped in the wind. Long, black claws and bony arms scrapped the sides of the wall. It walked on its hind legs. The creature was almost human-like, but it crawled in such a way that would drive most people insane. Its back like that of a lizard. Fresh skin-covered bones resembling scales lined its frame. Tiny points of needle-like appendages jutted out from the skin at unnatural points. Its tail was like an amalgamation of corrupted flesh and bone. All that, and there was still one other thing. It wasn't alone. 2 more clung to the walls of the alleyway in front of the blonde. He could also hear about 3 more on the same wall that he laid. It didn't seem like they saw him. They looked around, almost like they were trying to smell something out. Naruto heard the thuds of something heavy. It sounded like rolling balls of some sort. They rolled in front of his gas mask. One of the creatures screeched as the objects fell in front of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Please believe him. Please believe him. Please believe him that he tried hard not to cry. He tried so damn hard not to cry when he saw the heads of at least 5 or 6 shinobi rolling in a pile by the wind. Their eyes were eaten, their faces hollow with open sockets and tongueless mouths. Naruto recognized some of them, but there was one he recognized the most. He had gone to school with her. She was always quiet. She never could speak up. In my eyes, you're a proud failure. When I look at you, I get an intense feeling in my heart, because you're not perfect, because you fail, you have the strength to get back up, because I believe that is what true strength is. She always fainted whenever she saw him. She allowed him to cheat off her test. She always encouraged him even when someone like Sakura never would. I will never go back on my word, because that too is my ninja way. She had been hospitalized from her fight with Neji Hyuga. Yes, the blonde bit his lips so hard it bled to keep the sobs under control. The head of Hinata Hyuga, the former heiress of the Hyuga clan, rolled in front of him along with a group of other genin that he had gone to the academy with. Her eyeless head and open mouth left no wonders to her fate. The only solace Maid afforded to him was that maybe she had died before this gruesome fate befell her. Yet, even so, the desecration of her body made him tremble. Kill you. All in. You for this. All in. All of you, so help me. Naruto thought. He could feel his chakra going wild. Red and green chakra blasted from his body and scrapped the walls. Grayake. The creatures shrieked their unholy wails in Naruto's ears. Clearly, they reacted to the negative rage in the air while his chakra spiraled out of control. His eyes gained a deep red hue. His whiskers grew more profound. His nails sharpened. He desired nothing more than to rip them all to pieces. Yet, somehow he could tell. The one looking through him might have actually been looking at him. Somewhere in its corrupted brain, it knew something was in front of it. It wanted him to attack. He could tell because its twisted mouth formed a cracked grin of malice. It bared its teeth below the black hair strands above its lip. Its head tilted to the side inquisitively. Help me. With every fiber in his being, by the very vow he made for himself to protect Ayame and survive in this world, Naruto closed his eyes and calmed himself down. Kakashi, Iruka, and many others always told him he was too hot-headed and impulsive. Despite the shock, anger, and fear while he stared at Hinata's severed head, he didn't lash out. For one, these creatures had somehow gotten this close to him without him knowing. That meant that they had either tailed him for a while, or they were just that good at stealth. Naruto had to guess on the latter since there shouldn't be a reason why they didn't attack him. Second, he didn't know how many there were. He could see the 3 in front of him. The one standing before him, and the 2 on the alley wall. Something told him there was more. That meant, they were pack hunters. No different from lions and wolves. They usually had a leader, but Naruto knew next to nothing about how they structured themselves. Okay, I'll just take into account what I do know. They seem blind. They don't have any ears that I can see, so they must be deaf. So, why are they standing in front of me? What are they waiting for? Naruto thought. He slowly raised his left hand. One of the creatures tilted its head in that direction. Raaaaaaaaaaaeek. The leader screamed. The one on the wall stopped moving. It was then that Naruto saw it. It was very small, but he could make out the green chakra flowing around the bodies of the creatures. It wasn't individual. It was all linked together like some flaring web of fire. For a moment, the blonde moved his eyes a little. He noticed one of his arms was covered in the same green chakra as the creatures. What's going on? Why is my chakra green? Naruto thought as he looked at his hand. While the Kyuubi Jinchuriki contemplated this, there suddenly came a loud rumble. The ground trembled as corpses fell over and buildings crashed into each other. A massive earthquake rolled through the former village hidden in the leaves. The creatures wailed and ran off, leaving Naruto alone with the heads of those who had been, and the head of his former classmate. The rumbling grew stronger. Naruto watched in shock as tall buildings broke beneath the weight of their rusted base. They crashed down. Their thunderous might only added to the roar of the shaking ground. It didn't take long for the young man to fall to his knees. His face hit the dirt as the skies grew dark. The land exploded in bouts of hot steam and fire. A fissure line tore through the middle of the Shinobi district, swallowing up all the bodies and the fallen buildings. Those buildings that still stood were not safe either. Lightning struck the ground with such fire and fury, nothing in sections of the village could survive it. Not even Naruto was able to get up in time before he screamed as the ground opened up and devoured him. He screamed as he bashed against the side of a rock wall. He grabbed a ledge, but it was too slippery. He fell off and felt the wind blast out his lungs when his back crashed against a pillar of rock. Down and down, Naruto fell. His clothes tore and he tried to block anything from hitting his face. The wind from the wall pushed against his face before he slammed down into the ground below. Even then, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki couldn't stay down. He limped away from the falling boulders and sharp-edged cliffs that fell off the side. Dare he say this was even worse than the time he got pushed off that open cliff by that perverted sage. Naruto leaned against the wall in the dark. The rumbling continued. Between the falling corpses, those bodies being buried beneath mounds of rock and stone from buildings, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki wondered if he really wouldn't see Ayame again. After about 3 or 4 minutes, the shaking stopped. Naruto opened his eyes. He was in the dark. The only thing illuminating his place was the giant hole far above him. Worry for Ayame and Kurenai filled his body. If he had felt that earthquake, then what about them? Kuso, I gotta get up. Naruto groaned to himself while he clutched his shoulder in pain. With a heavy grunt of pain, he realigned his broken shoulder and panted. Yeah, tomorrow was a day off, most definitely. Naruto noticed the destruction in front of him. A large pile of debris and corpses laid in front of him. When he looked forward, there, almost mockingly, he saw the head of Hinata. Of course, he would have to see it. Why did he have to see it again? Someone had to be in with him. The young man turned away. He feared that if he looked at her anymore, he just might take his own life right then and there. That was another one of his friends that didn't make it. Who was Ing left? What was the point in even asking that question? Maybe he was the only one left. Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi, what would he do if he saw even one of them? Could he even stomach that? For Ayame, for Kurenai, he thought he could. He hoped he could, but he didn't know if he would be able to. Though he hated Sasuke, he didn't want him to die. Sakura wasn't the nicest. Okay, she was kind of an at times, but it was true she kept him in line. He definitely did stupid stuff sometimes. Kakashi, though he was late all the time, he was still reliable. Naruto stared up at the cavern walls. No doubt they were slippery. It was just like back in the cliff when Jiraiya pushed him off. He had tried to stick to help his fall, but the spikes were too smooth. He had no doubts the same applied to now. Plus, the last time he tried to climb a wall he fell on his He stared at the wall and gathered his chakra. It was strange. His body felt cold this time. It was almost freezing even. He stared at his palm. More green chakra exuded from his skin. Where did this even come from? Had he gained it from trying to unlock his chakra from a few days ago? He crossed his fingers. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he called out. He felt the chakra spike in his body, but he was down the 30 clones he'd envisioned. What the hell kind of chakra is this? Shouldn't all chakra help make a jutsu? Why can't I do it? Naruto growled out. This felt even worse than back in the academy. Okay, fine. The jutsu. He channeled the green chakra to his feet. He then pressed his foot to the wall. Gah! Naruto groaned as fell back on his head. In frustration, the young Uzumaki uttered every single curse word he could think of off the top of his lips. Was something actually ing with his life more than they already had? What chakra doesn't allow someone to do the most basic shinobi shit? Naruto had done this exercise plenty of times. Why? Why were so many things going wrong today? The blonde dropped to his knees. No, that wasn't the question. It was all wrong. Everything about this world was wrong. The earth, his life, his friends, the village, it was all wrong. He raised his fist to hit something, whether it be the ground, the wall, or himself. He lowered his fist. Sigh, what was the point in even getting angry? It wouldn't bring his friends back and it would stop this ceasing dread deep in his mind. All he could do was press on. Suddenly, Naruto cursed and slammed his neck. Something bit him. He looked down and he frowned. A bug? Man, good thing Shino's not here. He'd me for this, Naruto thought. He then jumped when he felt something crawl on his leg. What the? Naruto exclaimed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his flashlight. When he turned it on, he saw an abnormally large centipede slowly moving up his leg. Hey, get the off me. I ain't your blood bank, Datbeo. Naruto claimed. He kicked the arthropod away from him. It bounced on the ground before he heard it creak and skitter. He jumped and smacked the side of his cheek. Another insect. Suddenly, Naruto felt dizzy. He fell back against the wall. A horrid realization rose through his body. He felt something crawl on his arm. The blonde genin smacked his arm against the wall. This time a large leech was knocked off. Blood seeped from the side of his shoulder. His fingers twitched. This time, dread filled his body when he smacked his arm. Another blood-ing insect. Only this time, he hadn't felt it. It was like the feeling in his body had left him. Worry filled Naruto. He had to get the hell out of here. Naruto wiggled his body free as best he could. He didn't stop to think about the who's or the what's. He just went. The chakra. He grabbed two kunai and stabbed them into the wall. Over and over, he stabbed them as he pulled himself up. He shivered when he heard something creep and crawl in the walls. The harsh buzzing of large insects roared in his ears like blasting fans. His body sore and his senses leaving him, Naruto continued to climb. He realized he must have gotten bit somewhere because he nearly slipped. He was having a hard time judging how much strength to use. It felt like his arms were going to sleep. Something bit his boot and he kicked it off. He didn't know what it was, but he wasn't taking any chances. Sharp buzzing filled his ears again. He looked and he gawked. Something with the elongated beak of a hawk, arms of an insect, and wings of a bat flew at him. It screeched so loudly he was surprised his ears didn't bleed. Naruto took out a canister of oil and a match. He lit the match on fire with the wall. He then filled his mouth with oil and spat it into the match. A wave of flames danced in front of him as he burned the numerous bugs in front of him. The flying beast screamed at him before it flew back. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki continued climbing. His breath was hot. His vision was dazed. The light out of this hole he'd found himself in merely seemed like a tiny bulb. He couldn't feel his fingers. He actually slipped and fell off about 3 times, but he pushed on. He couldn't die here. He wouldn't. He had a reason to go back home now. In an instant, the blonde grimaced in pain. He grabbed his shirt and pulled it up. Another leech. He grabbed it and yanked it off. He threw it away and he continued climbing. Don't ask the Kyuubi Jinchuriki how long he climbed. He wasn't sure. All he knew was that through the pain, dizziness, and deliriousness, he was only a few climbs out of the fissure. He climbed as the buzzing around him seemed so far away. In fact, it sounded rather pleasant to fall asleep to. It was pretty nice. Wake thee up, brat. Are you trying to get used? A violent roar deep in Naruto's mind jolted him awake. His body was woozy, but he felt something in his right hand. He turned his head and the shock nearly made him fall. Squirming in his grasp was the large insect that had been waiting so patiently to pluck his flesh from his bones when he fell asleep. It was official. Uzumaki Naruto was fed up. A blast of red chakra exploded from his body while green chakra circled around his eyes. He stared at the large insectoid. Off. He snarled. His chakra flared violently. Like a maelstrom of angry tails, they bashed around the fissure walls. Bugs were lit aflame and fell down into the hole where he just was. With any strength he could muster, he slammed the bug into the wall once, twice, thrice. It screamed and screeched in anger at him before he ripped off one of its wings. He then threw it down. This is the last time I help you, brat. If you want strength, then work at it on your own. The voice said before it faded away. With a sigh of tiredness and filled with stress, Naruto climbed out of the fissure. The hot wind and dusty air blew in his face while he panted. He could barely hear the sounds of thunder outside while tornadoes rampaged in the distance. The young man grabbed his backpacks and walked away. An unholy scream made him move a bit faster. Absently, he heard a sharp sound of falling rocks and quaking earth from the fissure he'd just left. A heavy crash was heard behind him, but he didn't turn around to see what. He doubted his legs would have listened to him anyway. How much time passed? Minutes? Hours? Days? Naruto didn't know the answer to those questions. All he knew was that he made it to his apartment complex. He slowly walked up the stairs and stumbled to his room. His body banged against the railing while sweat dripped from his head. He banged on his apartment door. That was all he could manage before he fell over and passed out. Before his world went black, he heard Ayame scream. Naruto! She exclaimed. Naruto tried to speak, but no words came out. He opened and closed his mouth so many times he wondered if he looked like a gaping fish. For once in his life, the young genin was at a complete loss on what to do or say. What was he supposed to tell Kurenai? What could he say? Hey, Kurenai-san, sorry I just found 2 of your genin cell. Yeah, they're both dead. Sorry about that. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki finally just held his head down. Never mind. I'll tell you later, he said pitifully. Kurenai stared at Naruto curiously. She didn't miss the looks of horror, shame, and guilt written across his face. She'd seen the look many times in her career as a kunoichi. She saw the eyes of a very tired and crestfallen shinobi. She saw someone who had seen too much and received too little. She wondered what he had to say, but she could already tell it wasn't anything good. Though this concerned her, Kurenai didn't push it. She was never the type of person to force an issue that no one wanted to bring up. She'd woken up a bit before Naruto returned home. She made some small talk with Ayame about the world. She didn't know much. The last thing Kurenai remembered was fighting about 5 or 6 Otosuna shinobi in the streets. Then, a rock the likes of which she had never seen crashed into the earth. The ground shook like it was being torn to pieces. The pain and injuries she endured had knocked her out. She couldn't even say she woke up because her vision was blurry. She felt like she was constantly on the line between life and death for over a week. When she fully became aware of herself, she was in Naruto's apartment under warm blankets. Kurenai asked about the Oto-Suna invasion of Konoha, but Ayame merely shook her head. She opened the windows and told Kurenai that even if the invasion force won, there wouldn't be much for them to gain from their victory. The Genjutsu mistress would not forget the shock on her face when she stared into the vast nothingness of her village. Skies filled with putrid greenish-yellow dust clouds, sounds of drumming thunder, flashes of purple lightning, and tornadoes swirling angrily in the distance, she saw them all. Kurenai questioned if this was actually the end of the world or not. She asked Ayame question after question, but each only seemed to stress out the ramen waitress. The look on the poor young girl's face. She looked absolutely terrified and psychologically scarred. The Jonin quickly swapped topics. She asked Ayame if she had rescued her, but the girl said that she hadn't. Kurenai was in Naruto's bed long before Ayame got there. He was the one who had rescued her and nursed her back to health. To say Kurenai was stunned was an understatement. Forgive her previous assumptions, but she didn't expect such a thing from what the Academy deemed a failure. Hell, even his win against Kiba astounded her. His win against Neji, well, she basically just threw out everything she thought she knew about Uzumaki Naruto. She now saw what attracted Hinata to him. He might not be a genius by society's definition, but not many people could think and plan the way he did. Kurenai also noticed that her old clothes, covered in blood, were near a dirty clothes pile. Ayame claimed that Naruto found her before the ramen waitress. If that was the case, then Kurenai was going to close her eyes and sigh away the embarrassment. She had a feeling she knew where her thoughts were going. If Naruto had done what she thought he did, then she'd let it go. Oh sure, the embarrassment was more than enough to make her want to punch him until his mind erased any memories from his head, but she was more sensible than that. She knew when her life had been saved. She would be grateful for that. She'd try not to hold it against him. Though she did wonder how many days he had to care for her before Ayame arrived. She probably wouldn't ask. Anyway, she thought of her team. She hoped they were all right. While Kurenai didn't believe in playing favorites, she did admit that she felt closer to Hinata than to Kiba and Shino. Asuma always liked to joke that Hinata's demureness brought out Kurenai's maternal instincts. The Jonin played it off, but she wondered if he was right. Kurenai hoped she would get better soon, then she could be out there with Naruto. She would look for others and restore whatever order there was to this cursed world. The door opened, which interrupted the silence in the room. Ayame stepped through. Naruto-kun, you're awake. Thank God, she said before she threw her arms over his neck. Ayame-ni-chan, that hurts. Naruto exclaimed. Embarrassed, Ayame released him. Sorry. Your bag was kind of heavy, but I moved it to the living room. How are you feeling? You passed out right in front of the door. She replied. Naruto sighed. Let me go wash up and get some food first. I'll go over everything else later, he said as he stood to his feet. He wobbled for a moment, but he found his footing and left. Ayame and Kurenai glanced at each other. Did I interrupt something? The former asked. I honestly don't know, the latter replied. The blonde opened the door to his bathroom and gave himself a wash. Truth be told, he didn't remember the bath that much. Lukewarm water, a bar of soap, and a brush of the teeth, that was all he got until he sat at the table. His brunette friend entered the living room and placed a bento in front of him with some chips and juice. Yet, he might as well have not even seen it. All he could see was Kiba's corpse and Hinata's head, both moaning from the afterlife, cursing him for his weakness. Naruto, what's wrong? Obviously something's bothering you, Ayame said. The light of a candle was all that kept them light as they sat together. Naruto shivered. Nothing wrong, Ayame-ni-chan, he said slowly, almost as if to make himself believe what he was saying. Don't lie to me, Naruto. I've known you most of your life. I know when something's bothering you. Tell me, the ramen waitress insisted. I said it's nothing. I'm fine, Dadbeo, he returned. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Naruto-kun. I said I'm fine, damn it. Naruto screamed as he slammed his fist on the table. He widened his eyes. Slowly, he looked up and he dreaded the shock, hurt, and pain on his friend's face. Naruto's face contorted in sorrow. He slumped in his chair. His head bashed on his table. He hoped the light of the candle was dim enough to hide his face. How do I tell her, Ayame-ni-chan? Naruto asked, his voice laden with unbearable anguish and frustration. Ayame's gaze softened when she heard the distress in Naruto's voice. His words became uneven and croaked. His sobs reached her ears. How do I tell Kurenai-san that I saw 2 members of her team dead? Naruto asked. The brunette widened her eyes and her hands covered her mouth. What? Naruto found 2 members of that Jonin's team. She quickly understood what unnerved him so much. Her shock over his outburst quickly faded away while she watched him clench his fists. Kiba and Akamaru are gone. They're nothing but bones now back at the stadium. Hinata, she's, Naruto spoke of Hinata's fate and Ayame sat utterly stunned. No, how could such a fate befall such a sweet little girl like that? First, the village. Then, her father. Now, Naruto's friends. Everything was coming down around them. The grief and sorrow threatened to overwhelm them as the unforgiving wind blasted outside. Yet, both stiffened when they heard violent coughing from around the corner. They turned and they noticed Kurenai wheezing in pain as she clenched her chest. She coughed so hard blood expelled from her mouth. Naruto and Ayame quickly moved to help her. Whether she knew it or not, Kurenai dove into Naruto's chest and wailed, her cough spasming her pain in hot bursts. Kurenai felt her mind break in 2 pieces. She heard the scream from Naruto and got up to investigate. She just made it around the corner when she heard Naruto speak. Hinata. She's dead. She was beheaded and an earthquake dragged her and the Shinobi district into the ground. The Jonin felt a deep pain in her chest. Like she had been stabbed with a hot kunai, she dropped to the ground and coughed. Her croaks were so hard that she thought her heart would burst from her chest. Tears fell down her face. Images she wished not to see of her student's body rampaged through her mind like a moving movie screen. Hinata, Kiba, they were both dead. They both. Kurenai gripped Naruto's t-shirt as she cried. She screamed and screamed, but the winds blotted out her voice. She had failed them. Why was she still alive if she couldn't even protect her own students? What was even going on in this forsaken world anymore? The Jonin felt the bile rise in her mouth. It mixed with the blood and violently ruptured over Naruto's clothes. She gripped him hard. Her Jonin strength was not to be underestimated. They were gone. They were gone. Why were they gone? Hey, that's it. I'm in hell. We're all in hell. Kurenai laughed to herself before her world became dark. She fell in Naruto's lap and passed out, the stress of her sickness and the pain too much for her recovering body. The next time Kurenai woke up, it was morning. She slowly opened her eyes. She turned her head to her right and noticed Naruto sleeping on the side of the bed. She frowned for a moment until she looked up at the ceiling. Hinata, Kiba, 2 of her students were dead. Plus, the news of what befell the former was unlike any she'd ever been given. The Jonin thought of her students. Hinata always had confidence issues due to the strict nature of her family. She wasn't the most talented person out there, but she had her own strengths and resolve. Kurenai always wanted to try and give Hinata that reason to strive to do better. It was by now she understood that the reason was the boy sleeping at the foot of her bed. Then, there was Kiba. Oh, yes, there was Kiba. The headstrong, brash, sometimes inconsiderate, alpha, of the group. For all his faults, Kiba was a hard worker. Kurenai admitted it was rather hard to teach him, Hinata, and Shino since the three were so attuned to their family's style. None of them were adept at genjutsu either. Still, there were other things she tried to teach them. Kiba took to the fighting well. Of course, she disapproved of his trash talk, especially to a comrade like Naruto, but his fighting genius spoke for itself. Had he lived to his adult years, he would have become one of the most feared taijutsu shinobi in the world. She didn't hear any news on Shino, but she was out of hope at the moment. It probably wouldn't be long before his body turned up somewhere too. Kurenai wasn't even sure she could stomach the thought. Just thinking about Hinata and Kiba was enough. Kurenai violently coughed. She placed her hand over her mouth while her fit worsened. The pain in her chest was great, greater than any pain she'd ever felt. When she looked down at her palm, she saw how stained with blood it got. Would this be the same blood on her hands if she held Kiba and Hinata in her arms as they passed away? A hand shook Kurenai from her thoughts. She turned and noticed the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was awake. He grabbed a wet rag and cleaned her hands. He was silent as he worked and she was as well. The Jonin had to admit that something changed about the blonde. Last night, his eyes were filled with dread and weariness. Now, he was filled with a deep, burning inner fire that she'd not seen in many people. Also, she wasn't sure why, but she could see something swirling around him. No, perhaps see was the wrong term. She could feel it deep within her. Something in his body was unnatural, yet it exuded a mysterious strength all the same. How are you feeling? Naruto asked. He touched her forehead. Kurenai stared at her sheets. Was that what you were going to tell me last night? That Hinata and Kiba were dead? She asked. Without speaking, Naruto nodded. He didn't trust his voice to not crack if he did otherwise. I see, the Jonin said. The blonde genin stood up and walked out of the room. Later, Ayame returned with him. The ramen waitress sighed. Well, she's got a fever again, but I think the stress got to her. We don't have a doctor and the Konoha hospital's been torn down. I think we can only pray that she doesn't have any internal bleeding, Ayame said. Naruto slowly nodded. All right. Later in the week, I'll make a trip to the hospital. There should be something over there since over-the-counter stuff isn't gonna cut it. Ayame Nichan, give Kurenai-san plenty of fluids. She'll need more rest. I'll be outside, the blonde said as he turned around. Kurenai groaned. I'll be fine. I've rested enough. The Jonin exclaimed. Kurenai-san, Naruto-kun's right. You can't get up yet. The fact that you even got up yesterday wasn't good, Ayame protested. Despite the pain, Kurenai leaned up and pulled the covers off. She swung her legs and landed them on the ground. No, she didn't want to rest. She didn't want to go back to sleep. If she did, then those visions of things she didn't want to see would enter her mind. She wobbled to her feet. She was a Jonin. Kurenai had to take charge. She had to be the one to lead. She needed to protect this genin and this civilian. For her young charges who died, she had to be better. She had to. Kurenai-san, please lay down. Ayame pleaded. I said I'm fine. I know what my body can and can't do. She panted. The genjutsu mistress panted. Her vision blurred. She stumbled her way to the door. Just before she reached it, She felt the very minuscule amounts of her chakra fade away into nothingness. For an instant, her heart stopped. Her instincts flared. They told her of danger, a great pressure that made her fall to her knees. When she looked up, all she saw was an explosion of green aura surrounding the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's body. That mysterious aura flared like a great firestorm while it ate away the minimum amount of chakra she was even blessed to have. She tried to speak, but no words came out. When she stared into Naruto's eyes, gone was their blue color. A shade of deep green replaced them. In those eyes she felt small, insignificant, weightless. Get in bed, Kurenai-san, Naruto said, his tone neither angry nor harsh. It was merely spoken like it was just another day. Kurenai shivered. Was it that weird chakra? Was it because she felt delirious? She didn't know why, but his voice sounded like a crashing chorus of thunder. Whatever strength she had was used to barely keep her conscious. How could she have known that the young boy's chakra slowly engulfed her own eyes, filling her body, and making her quiver? The words that came from her mouth formed before she could even properly register them. Yes, Naruto-sama, she uttered. The room remained quiet for a moment. Ayame stared at Kurenai in shock and so did Naruto. Both failed to properly understand the words that came out of her mouth. Unfortunately, they couldn't think on them because Kurenai's eyes rolled into the back of her head and she passed out. She fell on top of their futon. The ramen waitress moved. She touched the Jonin's cheeks. The brunette breathed a sigh. She must have been more delirious than we thought. Don't worry, Naruto-kun. I'll get her into bed, Ayame said. Alright. Just give me an update when I get back, the blonde said. Ayame nodded. With that done, he closed the door behind him, grabbed his things and walked outside. What the hell was that? Naruto thought as he jumped on the railing. The dusty winds blew in his face before he dashed off. Naruto ran to a corner of the village he knew was deserted. Kurenai's odd behavior aside, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had one goal for today. Hell, a goal for the rest of the week. Find out what the hell this damn chakra was good for. That was 2 times Naruto almost lost his life. He didn't know how he got home both those times. Granted, the one with Ayame he felt he'd done pretty well, but yesterday was the worst he'd ever felt. Fear stopped him from acting out against those things back in the Shinobi district. He felt powerless when all those bugs nearly overwhelmed him. If this was the case, then why was he even alive? Why did he even save Kurenai and Ayame? If he couldn't protect them, then they'd all be dead anyway. If he kept this up, maybe he wouldn't be returning home at some point. I gotta figure out how this stuff works. Naruto thought. Hours. Many frustrating hours passed by for Naruto as he tried to make the green chakra within him work. Yet, the first day he went to bed with nothing but frustration. That said, he quickly cataloged what went wrong. So the chakra, for whatever reason, wasn't used for making jutsu or for climbing onto surfaces. He'd tried the cage bunshin many times. Like, a lot of times. A lot of times. He even tried the summoning technique, but that provided nothing as well. This led him to believe that whatever this chakra was, it wasn't useful for combat. Then what the hell is it used for? Naruto grumbled to himself as he went to sleep. The second day was when Naruto decided to try something else. Instead of using the green chakra to fuel its own power, he decided to try using it to fuel the powers he already had. Now that was where the interesting stuff happened. The green chakra was indeed chakra, but it was a different type of chakra. It was like, damn it, there was some science-y term for it that the blonde couldn't place. Well, for lack of a better term, it was an intensifier of sorts. Since jutsu didn't work, for whatever reason, Naruto decided to channel the green chakra directly into the reaches of his body. He'd seen Lee and many other wielders of taijutsu do this. Yeah, it was like normal chakra, it could enhance natural abilities, but this was even greater than what normal chakra could do. When the blonde threw a kunai, it sailed for miles. When it impacted a building, it brought that building to its knees. He could see further than the great walls of Konoha. He could run as fast and as far as he thought possible. He could lift and grab things heavier than he could without the chakra. It enhanced all of his natural abilities. That had to be it. Yet, there was a problem. This green chakra, the backlash was immense. When he had released himself from its effects, he nearly passed out. His chest burned. His arms and legs ached. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth and his eyesight blurred for about an hour. The backlash was just as great, if not greater, than when he first used the Kyuubi's chakra. All he knew was that, despite his joy at having something he could use to fight, he couldn't fully rely on it. It was rather wild, untamed. Each time he used it, he felt something primal, bestial, hungry, powerful seeping into the very edges of his mind. It only ever spoke one word. Anything else was a large, heavy, primordial roar just like the Kyuubi's. Dominate. That word Naruto remembered so clearly when he rested. It didn't sound like some pass of thunder. No, it sounded like a pass of wind, a common sound, the type of voice you'd associate with someone unimportant. Yet, it was always there, always waiting, always watching, always tempting. For the next 5 days, Naruto worked with this green chakra. If nothing else, he prided himself on his work ethic. When he wanted to train, he'd train until his arms ached and his legs fell off. Yet, no matter how much he trained, he couldn't get rid of the backlash. In fact, the longer he used it, the longer it got. Unfortunately, it rained for one entire day, so Naruto was stuck inside. Kurenai stopped bleeding, but Ayame continued to give the woman treatment. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki oversaw some of that, but he mostly spent his time in the living room. This was because he'd been using the green chakra for something else. Naruto meditated. Yeah, it doesn't sound right. Nevertheless, exercised his mind with the intensifying qualities of his new chakra. Naruto saw memories of all the things he'd experienced. Some he'd like to forget. Others he wished he hadn't forgotten. With the green chakra amplifying his brain, and his memories, Naruto remembered all of the lessons he got from the academy. Every taijutsu lesson, every ninjutsu lesson, and every genjutsu lesson. Everything seemed to intersect with him at different points in his life. The green chakra massaged his brain, stirred up everything he'd ever done, seen, smelled, heard. Some were too far back to recall. Yet, there was one he remembered. How did he even forget it? The Hokage residence. Despite the severe headache, Naruto walked over to his map and wrote on it. Now that he thought about it, the Hokage mansion had been destroyed by the stone faces. However, in case of invasions, there were select bunkers hidden throughout the village. Naruto didn't remember that, but back when Iruka was talking all about those safety procedures, he mentioned them. The stone faces, for example, were one of them. Clearly, it wasn't the smartest one, but in order to get people there in a hurry, it was the most optimal. That said, Naruto remembered there was something beneath the Hokage mansion because he snuck down there once. He'd been caught by the Sandaime and gotten in trouble. When he asked what was down there, Sarutobi said, "A place I hope that'll never need its lights turned on." Naruto didn't know what that meant, but he'd like to try now. Well, that said, the damn mansion was rubble now. How could he find it? Still, I guess it's worth a look, he thought to himself. The next day, Naruto went out and simply surveyed everything. On the roof of a building, he stared at the Shinobi district through a pair of binoculars. Those creatures continued to patrol the area. He watched them closely, carefully even. Kakashi was always on about that know your enemy stuff. No better time to know his enemy than now, he figured. The massive earthquake fissure from a few days ago eagerly showed its after effects. Buildings had been bashed into each other, the hills of bodies slumped over like slabs of meat for a butcher, and debris littered the ground. Eyeless and tongueless heads rolled in the wind upon the sands of the walkways. A rain tarp over his body to protect him from the wind, Naruto wrote down what he observed from these creatures. For lack of a better term, he just decided to call them bone crawlers. It wasn't hard to figure out why. They crawled, like, everywhere. Clearly, they didn't eat. Or he assumed they didn't eat because he'd watched them for at least 6 hours, but they never bit into any of the bodies that littered the ground. They were very adept and nimble. Like a shinobi, they could leap across buildings without sight or sound. How they did this, he didn't know. They also typically traveled in fives. 4 usually followed behind 1. They made noises or clicks from somewhere in their bodies. Unlike last time, none of them screeched, but he assumed that was because there was no threat. Instead, they seemed to rip the heads off the decaying bodies and take them somewhere. As far as he saw, there were only those 5. He waited to see if more would come, but they never did. Yet, as he observed them, Naruto stared at the growing mist hanging over the shinobi district like a plague of death. His enhanced mind pondered their movements. Why are they staying over there? Aside from that thing in the Chunin exam stadium and those bugs in the fissure, I haven't seen anything else out here. Why don't they just take over the civilian district? Naruto thought to himself. If he treated them like animals, then he guessed it could be territory. They had what they needed, so maybe they didn't need to expand anywhere else. Maybe there was something here he wasn't getting. Not once, not one single time, they didn't even consider coming to his part of the village. In fact, dare he say they almost seemed adamant to avoid it. The thought that there might be something in his part of the village did worry him, but what could he do? He couldn't exactly go out finding it. He'd had enough close calls for the entire week. Once the day was finished, Naruto moved back inside. He noticed Kurenai was at the table along with Ayame. Both greeted him. Though the Genjutsu mistress was still moving sluggishly, the fact that she was moving at all made Naruto glad. Kurenai had stopped coughing blood after a while, but it was clear the news of Hinata and Kiba's deaths shook her greatly. Welcome home, Naruto-kun. What have you found? Ayame asked. Yo Ayame Nichan, Kurenai-san. Well, I've got a bit of an idea, Naruto said as he took off his dusty clothes. He took a seat in his chair. Oh, before that, Naruto-kun, the water jugs and bottles in one of the apartments are starting to get low, Ayame said. Naruto pulled out a notepad and wrote that down. There were still plenty of places to loot water jugs and bottles from. Alright, I'll take stock when I can, he replied as he took out his map and laid it on the table. Ayame passed him a bento and some juice. She gave one to Kurenai as well before she got her own. The three stared at the map while Naruto tapped one of the spots he marked with a pen. Kurenai-san, you're a jonin, so you'll probably know. I know there was something beneath the Hokage mansion. Gigi told me about it. Can you tell me what it is? He asked. Eyes turned to Kurenai. She stared at the spot Naruto marked and sighed. Normally, I would have said that's confidential, but I don't think anyone's gonna blame me if we don't follow protocol. There's probably no one left alive with the authority to court-martial me anyway. Not like there's a place to hold one either, she replied slowly, almost depressingly. The black-haired woman rolled her neck and leaned forward. Hokage-sama said it was a series of tunnels that led to deeper places in Konoha. I've never been down there myself, but I know all the major shinobi facilities in the village are linked to that tunnel. The Anbu headquarters, the Forest of Death Tower, and other important facilities are connected to that tunnel. It also leads to some other places, but I wasn't authorized to know, Kurenai answered. Naruto and Ayame blinked. There were places that even Jonin didn't know about. You're going to investigate? Kurenai asked. Naruto swiftly nodded. Yeah, the apartment's getting weaker by the day. It won't be long before it falls down. I've got to find us another place that won't get melted so easily. That was why I went to the Chunin exam stadium where I found Ayame Nichan. I'm the only one who can actually fight right now, so it's only natural that I should go right. He asked. Kurenai had to admit she was impressed. Was this really the kid that dove into combat without a plan? He definitely wasn't what Kurenai thought he was. Well, they say adversity builds character. And should you encounter any more of these creatures mutating in the village? Kurenai asked. Both noticed Ayame shiver in dread at the thought. I've found a good way to fight them. Besides, I'm only investigating Datbeo. Besides, with the fall of the stone faces, I might not even be able to get in through the Hokage mansion. I sure don't know where the Anbu headquarters are. To get to the Forest of Death, I'd have to go all the way to the Shinobi district again. I don't know what the earthquake might have done to it, he replied. But how are you going to? Ayame stopped when Naruto smiled at them. Don't worry. I'll figure something out. I swore to protect you both and that's what I'm gonna do. I'll find us a safer place. He said earnestly. So honest was his reply that neither Kurenai nor Ayame knew how to combat it. His words felt reassuring, even in these deplorable circumstances. It felt nice to them both. And if the Hokage mansion doesn't work out? Kurenai asked. Naruto tapped another part of the map. Well, there is the red light district. I know a few casinos with underground bars, and entertainment tunnels. The way the world is now, staying somewhere high isn't gonna help us. Hell, sometimes I'm nervous with us staying on this floor, Naruto replied. Slowly Kurenai nodded. That made sense. Not knowing when some of these buildings would fall and crumble into dust at any given moment. Naruto, how do you even know about the red light district? Ayame asked, an odd smile on her face. The blonde rolled his eyes. Please, Ayame Nichan, you're talking to the guy who didn't have a bedtime growing up. Saw many things, worked for some of the places too, he said. You worked in the red light district? Ayame asked. The young genin shrugged. The stipend for orphans wasn't as great as you think it was. That barely covered the cost of my textbooks, shinobi gear, and other stuff. I needed the money for food and other clothes. How do you think I got so good at dodging Chunin and Jonin? I did rush jobs all the time. No one's gonna suspect a kid of carrying cargo. It wasn't until I became a genin that I made enough money to quit the lifestyle, he explained. The ramen waitress and Jonin glanced at each other again. Neither knew what to say to that as well. Kurenai felt rather bad. She would like to help, but she was still incapacitated. By Naruto's accounts, the environment was rougher. She was already sick. Hell, she couldn't even make it to the door a few days ago. Though her fever had lowered again, she knew it'd be some time before she started throwing kicks and punches. Plus, there was something that disturbed her. No matter how hard Kurenai tried, she couldn't gather her chakra. She thought that her chakra would have returned by now, but she didn't even feel 1% of what she once had. Hell, the chakra she could feel was the bare minimum that a human needed to keep themselves alive. She actually tried to gather her chakra, but that caused a pain so intense she thought she almost died. It felt like her body nearly exploded from the inside out. So great was the pain that she passed out for an entire day. She wondered if Naruto felt the same thing. Surely, he'd tried to cast jutsu at least once. That said, Kurenai kept it to herself for now. They were already worried about her enough. She didn't need to add to it. Besides, judging from the bags under Naruto's eyes, he was truly trying hard for their sake. With the planning done, Naruto spent the rest of the day going over what he observed of the bone crawlers, trained, and gave Kurenai and Ayame a wireless radio that he found along with headsets. He'd found them along with other things in the Shinobi district. With this, at least he could stay in contact with them. Naruto also set up a training board for Kurenai. It wasn't much, but at least she could practice her throws. He also took the time to help Ayame practice with kunai and shuriken. They couldn't take any chances. She'd have to be capable just like them. When he was gone, he tasked Kurenai with overseeing the brunette's training. No one argued. And Kurenai, when you get better, I've got something I wanna show you, Naruto said. Her interest piqued. The Jonin quickly nodded. Night began to settle over the ruins of Konoha. Once again, the three noticed how cold it was. Naruto lit some candles as best he could, but they didn't do much except fill the entire room. Kurenai fell asleep after being given her medicine. Before they fell asleep, Ayame told Naruto that they were all out of the medicine that they'd been using. The blonde sighed. Though they did have more medicine, he thought he'd need to make a trip to the Konoha hospital eventually. His thoughts drifted him off to sleep. The next morning, he got dressed. Ayame prepared breakfast with what tools she had. She also packed Naruto his lunch for when he was outside. Kurenai was still asleep and he wanted to get a head start into the day. Even when he woke up, it was still cold outside. He decided to bundle up. Naruto switched on his headset. He adjusted the sound and the radio frequency. Alright, the plan was to look into any instance of the Hokage mansion. Then he'd find water. If he had the time, he'd go to the hospital to pick up whatever he needed. Of course, the more casual looting wasn't out of the window for the day either. Once he was geared, Naruto pulled up the door. Be safe, Naruto-kun, Ayame called. He gave her a thumbs up and then left. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki landed on a nearby rooftop. It was so cold, he could see his breath. When he looked at the sky, the putrid green-yellow dusty air was gone. In its place were clouds of dark gray. The wind blew faster. The village was quiet. When had it ever been so quiet except for the freezing wind? Wasting no time, Naruto touched his earpiece. Ayame Nichan, do you read? I read you, Naruto-kun. Ayame said over the line. Good, I'll be sure to make regular updates, he said, his voice muffled by the scarf he wore. The blonde dashed towards the ruined buildings of the Hokage mansion and the Hokage stone faces. He remembered being here before. Now, it just seemed like a distant memory. A memory of the dead civilians who hid in the faces during the invasion. Hey, even that seemed so far away now. It probably happened close to a month ago by now. As he ran, he thought of his apartment. It wasn't getting better. Actually, one of the spare apartment rooms crashed into the lower floors. Luckily nothing was in there, but that only made him realize that he was running out of time. It wasn't holding as long as he thought it would. It wouldn't be long before he said goodbye to his home as well. After some time, Naruto landed on the ground before the crushed buildings. Unlike last time, there were no bloodstains. They must have been covered up by the wind and sand or melted away by the acid rain. Either way, it was just as lifeless as the rest of the village. He stepped over the fallen gates and entered the compound. He looked at the Hokage stone faces. A few sculpted sides had been melted from the constant rain and weather. It wouldn't be long before they crumbled to dust as well. He tried not to think about it. Alright, time to get to work, Naruto said as he stared at the mountains of debris. He did a quick scan of the area for danger. Once he found none, he raced to another rooftop. He took out his binoculars and scanned the Shinobi district. He was surprised. Huh, they're gone. Where did they go? Naruto thought. The bone crawlers weren't anywhere in sight. For nearly the past week he'd been observing them. They always stayed out till late. They were out very early in the morning. Why would they be gone now? Though worried, Naruto moved back to his task. For the next coming hours, hard work and labor was the young genin's burden. He pushed and pulled debris out of the way. Fallen stone, and splintered wood, shattered remnants of monuments, Naruto moved them all. Beneath his mask, his breath was hot, but his body shivered. It was very cold outside. Naruto groaned as he lifted a large piece of wood. There was no longer any strain on his body from his fight with Gaara. He knocked it over with a resounding crash. His goggles blocked the flying dust from getting on him. Find anything? Ayame asked. Naruto grunted. Nothing but dust and wandering ants. I've been out here for 6 hours, he replied. He leaned against a cracked wall and took a breath. Look around the area where the Hokage mansion fell. It's a tunnel system. It's not capable of moving itself. Naruto was a little surprised to hear Kurenai on the other line. He followed her instructions and moved to the spot where he thought the Hokage mansion once stood. It was a little hard to tell. Between all the natural disasters, nothing was where it once stood. After about 2 more hours, his efforts were rewarded. It's here. Or at least, I think it is, Naruto said. It took some digging from all the sand and dirt, but he finally found 2 metal doors with a large seal over them. Thanked Kami. So what will you do now? Investigate? His former ramen-making friend asked. He should probably come back. The seal on the door is very complicated. All Jonin know how to open it, but a genin can't. I know how to open it, Naruto said, cutting off Kurenai. What? Kurenai asked. Though the 2 ladies weren't around, the blonde nodded. I know how to open it. I can see it, he said. It was true, he could see it. He could see every single piece of the seal coming apart in front of his eyes in hues of green light, just like the chakra he'd been training with. He didn't know how, but it was the same way with the storage scroll. The seal in the storage scroll, the seal on the metal doors, he could decipher them like they were simple locks. Don't ask him how, but he could. He could see the intricacies of the matrices and the unraveling of each piece. All he had to do was touch the seal and his chakra did the rest. He didn't even have to command it. It just worked. The seal became undone and the doors unlatched. They revealed a large ladder descending into darkness. Now, forgive Naruto if he didn't readily jump at the chance to dive in. He'd had a fill of dark places for a good little while. It's open, he said. What? That's impossible. How did you? Apologies, Kurenai-san, but we'll have to save the questions for later. These don't exactly run on the best battery. Naruto grabbed the door handles and opened them. It was a long shot and he was running low on hope these days. Yet, he was hopeful that some people could have escaped into these tunnels. Did he expect otherwise? Probably not. However, he wouldn't be him if he just gave up that easily. Suddenly, Naruto shivered. His gloved fingers got so cold they actually began to hurt. When did it get so cold? Is it snowing? We aren't in the winter months. Naruto was too busy shivering to tell who said that. He looked up and he saw that the statement rang true. It was snowing. He held out his hand and tiny flakes landed on his gloves. For a moment, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki smiled. Though this definitely wasn't the time of the month for snow to be falling, it was rather nice to see. However, it didn't stay that way for long. Slowly, Naruto was sure his arm was getting heavier. It was probably the clothes, but he didn't remember wearing anything as heavy as he was feeling now. When he looked down, unbridled fear ran through his heart. What the? He growled as the snow began to splice itself together. White strands of frozen water stuck to each other and quickly began to spread like some strange fungus growth. Like hundreds of crawling worms, or creeping ants, they formed together. They stringed up his arm in a violent rush almost as if to try and overtake his body. Naruto cursed as he used his other hand to try and wipe the snow off, but it quickly began to spread on his other hand. Both arms were quickly becoming encased as the sickening strings of cold wrapped around his clothed hands. By the grace of Kami, Naruto was able to wiggle his hands out of his gloves. He stepped away as the strings of snow fully wrapped around the fingered material. They fell to the ground frozen solid before they cracked and crumbled into nothingness. What's going? Naruto didn't get the chance to finish. He shivered again. Now his back felt heavier. He turned his head and he watched as more snow piled on top of each other. Kuso. Even the damn snow's trying to me. Naruto thought. He quickly grabbed his earpiece. Ayame Nichan. Kurenai-san, stay inside. Don't touch the snow. Whatever you do. Naruto growled as he struggled to get out of his clothes. Naruto-kun, what's going on? Ayame asked. The snow. It's alive. Naruto yelled as he threw off the clothes he was wearing before the tendrils of snow could fully wrap around him. Naruto, slow down. Snow can't be alive, Kurenai replied. Fine. Whatever. Just don't go outside, he emphasized as he threw his coat away and jumped through the doors in the ground. He then quickly closed them and sealed then shut. He could hear the way the snow and sleet landed on the doors. He could also hear the crawling, creaking of metal it made as the snow, like some kind of otherworldly creature, crawled along the ground. Ayame Nichan, Kurenai-san, come in. Do you read me? Naruto called over his mic. There was no response. The lining of the walls must have prevented communications from getting through. The distant howls and dripping of water unnerved the blonde. It was completely dark where he was. He also didn't know how long it was going to snow for. Could something like that even pierce the doors? Were Ayame and Kurenai alright? What if the snow crushed through his house? They'd have no protection. Ayame Nichan, Kurenai-san, come in, Naruto said nervously. More static. For about 5 minutes, Naruto called out but received no reply. He wanted to open the doors and check. He wanted to open the doors and look. He wanted to open the doors and run. If they died too, he'd be alone again. Was he too hasty in looking for a place to stay? Maybe he should have just run back. Anything would be better than this constant fear of worrying. The snow got heavier. Naruto actually thought he heard hail from the way it was beating against the door. A little worried, he took a step back. If by chance it did break through, then he hoped he'd be far enough away. Naruto inhaled and then exhaled. Easy, Naruto Uzumaki. Alright, the place is boarded up. They also have plenty of supplies. We were running low on water, but they should be able to get enough between 2 people. They also have juice if they need it. I'll just hope that they're fine. I'll wait a few days, Naruto thought before he heard something rumble from within the stone-clad walls around him. Swiftly, Naruto pulled out his flashlight. He flicked it on and stared at his backpack. It wasn't great. He had only packed for a day's trip. Never mind that half his food was gone from the lunch he'd eaten earlier. He only had a little bit of water and half of his food. How long was he going to have to stay here? After some self-contemplation, Naruto grabbed his backpack and stood to his feet. He looked at the stairs which led into the deep, dark tunnels. He swallowed his fear. Thoughts of what could lay in this darkness unnerved him. Yet, he pushed on. He couldn't let his fear stop him. Besides, if the place was free, then it was much safer than his house. Naruto walked down the steps and into the encroaching darkness until it smothered him. He waved his flashlight around the area. The air was cold, but he figured that was because of the wind. He cursed to himself. His coat had gotten taken by the snow, which left him without much covering. He continued down the flight of stairs. Well, at least I don't feel like I'm being followed this time, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki thought to himself. He walked down for a rather long time, he felt. How long he walked he wasn't sure. The dark oddly warped his sense of time. His fingers touched the stone walls. He absently noted that stone slowly gave way to steel and metal. The distant howls of wind flowing from below him caused him some concern, but not too much. He finally reached the bottom. His steps echoed through a series of long tunnels and interconnecting lanes. As expected of a bunker which led itself beneath the village. There were no lights on. He didn't expect them to be. More than likely they ran out of power when the storms hit. With no one to turn them back on, they must have just stayed dead. Well, it wasn't like Naruto could get them back on, so he decided to keep moving. He rubbed his arms. He was cold. The young genin knew no direction he was going. He turned down a series of hallways that led to nowhere. He didn't suppose there'd be a map of the area in a place like this. All those elite shinobi probably trained to navigate this place with their eyes closed or something. Naruto pointed up his flashlight. There was a soft creak of the tunnels that made them rather creepy. He wouldn't say why, but it's what he felt. He turned down another hallway. Once he turned down that hallway, the blonde stopped. There was a glimmer, a brief flashing light that reflected off the lens of his torch. He almost missed it. It had been a long time since he'd seen it. A trap laid above, triggered to pull several kunai hidden in the ceiling or alert, someone living down here. It wasn't just one either. There were dozens. Numerous explosion tags, fire tags, chakra ceiling tags, and more weapons littered the hallway. Cautious, Naruto turned out his flashlight. True, it made it harder for him to see the traps, but there was no way someone wasn't monitoring them. If they were an enemy, he'd do the same as back in the Chunin exam. Give them no reason to be certain of his position. Though the tunnels turned dark, Naruto, for some strange reason, could still navigate them just fine. He didn't know why, but he felt he had a better perception of things since he'd done his training. He touched the wall and he could feel where everything was. The kunai, the shuriken, the explosive tags were where he could sense them. Well, he couldn't see them, but he could sort of picture where they were. He stepped over one trap. He then stepped over another that had been double layered. A piece of wire was close to slicing into his neck. Whoever made these traps, they were good. Not nearly as good as him, but good. Once he maneuvered his way through the traps, Naruto turned down another hallway. Honestly, just how many places could these go to? Suddenly, Naruto stopped. He slowly reached into his backpack and pulled out a kunai. He heard footsteps. It was still far away, but he could hear something about the weather outside. He found an open grove in the wall and stepped into it. He then took out a metal pin and threw it at the opposing wall. The pin made a loud clang. The voice stopped. A light pierced through the tunnel he was just in. Footsteps grew louder. "I'm telling you, I heard something," one of the voices said. It sounded like a woman. It could just be the mice again. They link to wander these dark tunnels sometimes, another one spoke. This one was definitely a man's voice, but it sounded oddly familiar. That said, forgive Naruto if he didn't leap for joy. End of the world or not, he couldn't be sure if there were only Konoha shinobi and civilians live. Oto and Suna forces could still be here. Mice. Then you go first. I'll hold the light so we can see. Despite how cold he felt, Naruto could feel the sweat pouring down the side of his face. He'd never been one for stealth. Kakashi would always tell him that he never acted very shinobi-like. The blonde always took it for a compliment rather than an insult. He tried to breathe. His mind raced. His chest thumped. He clenched the kunai in his hands. It was dark so he couldn't see very well. The light from one of the others shined down his tunnel. The shadow of a young man got closer and closer until the Kyuubi Jinchuriki struck. The blonde didn't think any further. He just jumped into action as he was infamous for. He surprised both enemies. The genin grabbed the young man. He was the closest. He then swung his kunai and tipped it right near his captive's throat. Don't move or I'll him. The young genin threatened. He pressed his blade into his captive's throat, pricking it with blood for emphasis. The light shined in his eyes. The young girl growled. Do it and it'll be the last mistake you ever. What? Hey, it's you. That kid that beat Neji at the Chunin exam. The girl exclaimed. Naruto frowned. Well, it wasn't impossible for someone to recognize him. Hundreds of people saw him triumph over the Hyuga prodigy. Nevertheless, he didn't withhold his grip. Who are you? He asked. The woman held up the flashlight over her face. Naruto widened his eyes. Though she looked worse for wear, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki noticed that it was Neji and Bushy Brow's female teammate. She looked a bit pale from when he last saw her. Her hair had also been let down. He didn't know why, but he spoke. You're Neji's teammate, Naruto exclaimed. Tenten at your service. Now, how about you remove the kunai and start apologizing to your friend there, the girl named Tenten said as she pointed to the blonde's captive. He looked down. The flashlight showed a boy about as pale as Tenten. His face was mostly covered, but Naruto could never forget that torn gray jacket. He also couldn't forget those awkwardly black glasses on his captive's face. He'd only seen one other person wear glasses similar to those. That person was much older and way more perverted. That same stupid sensei who fell for his harem jutsu. Yet, this one in front of him merely looked at him stoically. It's good to see you as well, Naruto. You can release me now, the young man said. Naruto's mouth thinned as he saw an insect fly past his face. Shino. Naruto dropped his kunai and fell back to the wall. He wasn't sure whether to cry or laugh. Hell, he might have done a mixture of both. One of Kurenai's students was still alive. That alone made the blonde happy. Then there was a young kunoichi in Tenten, Neji's teammate. If he wasn't so exhausted, he might have hugged them both out of sheer elation. You both have no idea how awesome it is to see your faces, Dadbao. Naruto exclaimed as he leaned back against the wall. The two quickly sat next to him. You don't look so bad yourself. Where were you hiding? We searched the tunnels for weeks and never found a soul, Tenten replied. Confused, Naruto pointed upwards. What do you mean? I've been on the surface in the village. You guys won't believe all the crazy stuff out there. He answered back. Tenten and Shino looked at each other. Though it was dark, with two flashlights it was easy to do. They looked like they didn't believe what they were hearing. You were on the surface? Tenten asked. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki nodded. Yeah, I'm at my apartment with Ayame Nichan and Kurenai-san. Rescued them both and now we've hunkered down, he said. Though he and Tenten didn't see it, Shino visibly relaxed. So, his sensei was still alive after all. Well, that was some good news in this otherwise depressing world. However, that didn't answer the glaring issue present. Naruto, Shino spoke. The blonde turned to him. Are you sure you were on the surface? The former Aburame heir asked. Naruto grew worried. What? Of course I was. Just look at all this stuff I got. He said as he showed them his backpack. He opened it and both genin gawked at the supplies he'd gathered. There was some eaten food, 2 bottles of water, binoculars, storage scrolls, and sets of kunai and shuriken. Tenten picked up one of the kunai. She shivered from its cold touch. How long had it been since she felt the feel of sharp steel in the palm of her hand? Way too long. A perfectly well-maintained kunai and not the rusty ones they'd been using. But that's impossible, the kunoichi of Team Guy stated. This got the attention of the young genin. He looked between them both. Okay. He was starting to get worried. What's impossible? He asked as Shino picked up a shuriken. The air is toxic, Naruto. No one can survive up there. If you up there then you'd have seen all the bodies on the ground, nothing but bones, right? The only places we've gone to are the Forest of Death Tower and the Anbu headquarters. Out the windows, we saw the bodies, Shino replied slowly. Naruto widened his eyes upon this realization. He wanted to think they were messing with him, but the look of horror on their faces, well, he couldn't really tell with Shino, was enough to let him know they weren't joking. Well, that didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to Ayame Nichan and Kurenai-san either. I've gone out almost every day for nearly a month now. The blonde Jinchuriki exclaimed. The other 2 genin looked at each other. It wasn't that they thought Naruto was lying. It just seemed so impossible for him to be telling the truth. After all, the evidence of him being on the surface was obvious. Despite going into the tower in the Forest of Death and the Anbu headquarters, there weren't any weapons. No one knew why. Surely they couldn't all have been taken, but that was the case. They hadn't seen a kunai or shuriken until now. We should inform Kosuke-san about this, Shino said. Tenten agreed. Naruto looked confused. Who was that? Once the 3 rested, Shino and Tenten asked for Naruto to follow them. Seeing as how he was only stumbling his way through the dark tunnels, he wisely decided to do so. The trio walked together. Naruto heard the sound of their steps echoing through the creaking steel. Tenten's flashlight roamed the halls back the way the 2 came. Excuse me, Naruto. I have a question, Shino said. Naruto had a feeling he knew what that question was going to be. It brought him great unease and sadness. He never thought he'd break news like this to someone like Shino. Is it about Kiba and Hinata? Naruto asked. Shino didn't even reply. The bug user already knew he'd been found out. Well, perhaps he made it kind of obvious. He just looked at the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, silently waiting for his words. However, judging by the way the blonde's head dipped down and his face filled with despair, the Aburame wondered if he even wanted to know. Kiba and Hinata are dead. Kiba was at the Chunin exam stadium. Hinata was. She was somewhere else, the blonde answered. Naruto heard nothing. He looked at Shino. The genin looked forward. Naruto couldn't properly gauge his friend's reaction from the darkness in his black glasses. I see, Shino said. He spoke nothing more. Oddly, Tenten didn't ask about her own team. Naruto didn't have the heart to bring it up either. It actually wasn't until another 10 minutes of awkward silence passed that he spoke again. So, how did you guys make it down here? Kurenai told me about this spot, but she said only a Jonin could open it. How'd you guys get in? He questioned. Tenten chuckled. You might not believe it, but a genin helped us get in, she said. Naruto stopped. What? A genin helped them? Was it possible there was someone who could use the green chakra just like him? Though excited, Naruto held his nerve. Perhaps he'd get his questions when he got to wherever they were leading him. The flashlight shined in his face. Something wrong? Tenten asked. Naruto shook his head. No, sorry. Just found it strange as all, he said as he rubbed the back of his head. The female genin nodded. Well, he's a genin in rank, but jonin in skill. He's who we're taking you to meet. Kosuke Maruboshi-san, better known as the Eternal Genin, she said. Naruto's mouth thinned. The guy definitely didn't sound that tough if he was called something like that. That said, he learned not to underestimate people. Maybe there was something he was missing here. After all, he'd gotten by because people underestimated him in the same capacity. As they walked, Tenten told her story. Once the Otosuna invasion of Konoha started, she immediately started helping move people to the shelters and bunkers. She'd managed to dispatch a few enemies, but her main focus was the safety of civilians. It was then that she saw the giant rock fall from the heavens and slam into the earth. Its force was so great that it shook the ground beneath her feet. She figured she must have passed out because when she woke up, Konoha stunk of dead. She'd seen the rotting corpses and decaying bodies lining the streets. She'd heard the people screaming as chaos and anarchy reigned through the village. She also remembered how hard it was to breathe. Tenten ran through Konoha, its buildings on fire, its people in disarray, and the sheer chaos of everything wrapping around her like a hot blanket of death and destruction. She watched earthquakes sink homes and families. Friends and neighbors were crushed and stamped into the ground over others. Not even children were safe as falling debris crushed them without mercy. All this and Tenten could only watch as people began clawing at their faces and necks in pain. She remembered the blood that spilled out before they fell to the ground dead. The air was too tight, too thick, too strong. She'd passed out. When she woke up, she was with Shino and Kosuke Maruboshi beneath Konoha in the tunnels. It was her and them along with a few other genin, chunin, jonin, and civilians. At first, everything worked well for a week. A few jonin led the survival group and began tasking orders. Kosuke, though a genin, was one of them. The genin were in charge of tending to the civilians. The chunin were tasked with heading out and reporting back the situation. A jonin would go with them to unlock the doors. That's how it was supposed to go. The first group never returned. Worried, the second group went out to look for them a week later. They didn't return either. After that, the civilians were rightfully scared. They began pointing blame, some got angry, and others got scared. Loss of food, water, and shelter, fighting began to take place. Kosuke calmed everyone down. He said that they would be fine. He also said that he would check to see what was going on. Tenten managed to convince Shino that they should investigate as well even though they should have stayed behind. Both watched as Kosuke, a jonin, and 4 chunin got around together 5 days later. They would exit out the tower of the Forest of Death and look through the village. If there were enemy forces, then the trees would make for good cover. It was a solid plan. It could work. It didn't. It went wrong. It went just so wrong. The jonin and 4 chunin stepped out. The instant they did, Tenten had nightmares about what she saw. The 4 chunin inhaled the air and screamed as their bodies turned to bones and their bones turned to dust. The jonin might have lasted a second longer, but before he could even turn around he was dead. That was when Tenten knew their world was gone. That was probably why the groups went missing. They didn't even make it past the front yard of the Forest of Death. Kosuke went back to the group and they were furious. He tried to tell them what he'd seen. Hell, even though it exposed them, Tenten and Shino tried to back up his claims. However, who would listen to an old man and 2 genin? The civilians, remaining genin, and few shinobi guards all left save Kosuke, Shino, and Tenten. They left down another hallway with what supplies they could get. In the weeks that followed, Tenten wondered what happened to them for she never saw anyone ever again. From then on, it had just been her, Shino, and Kosuke in the weeks that followed. Naruto swallowed the lump in his throat from the story. When he asked Shino, his friend merely shook his head. He merely replied with, "I'll tell it another time." The Kyuubi Jinchuriki assumed it was because his friend was dejected about the news of his friends. He didn't push the matter. Besides, Shino wasn't the type of guy to talk about his feelings anyway. Maybe Kurenai could get something out of him when they met. After some more walking, Tenten and Shino guided Naruto down a long ladder. A few turns of tunnels later, he noticed a large door. The kunoichi knocked on it 5 times, then 3, then 10. She grabbed the doorknob and opened the door. When Naruto stepped inside, he saw a plethora of sleeping rags and empty cans. There were a few steel barrels filled with fire. More than likely they were meant to resemble fire pits. He'd used one as well, just not so big. They also seemed to provide just enough light so someone didn't trip over themselves. When the Kyuubi Jinchuriki finally got a good look at Tenten and Shino, he was rather surprised. Not only were they pale, but they were also much thinner, almost sickeningly so. They reminded him of the times he had to go without food. Then there were the bags beneath their eyes, well, Tenten's that he could see. He'd seen that in himself too when he looked into his mirror. "Nice place," Naruto remarked. "Well, I don't think Hokage-sama created this place for it to be a hotel resort," Tenten answered as she guided him through a hallway with a series of empty rooms. In those rooms, the blonde said sleeping bags and sheets. No doubt, people had been down here with them before. Clearly, they were all that was left. Shino knocked on the door. "Kosuke-san, we've returned early. It's an important matter," the young genin of Team 8 said. "Ah, Shino-kun, do enter. I've boiled some hot water." An elderly voice came from the other side. Naruto raised an eyebrow while Shino opened the door. "You better pull out an extra tin can then. We have a guest," Tenten replied. Naruto stepped inside and he saw an old man in ragged clothes. His hair was as gray as storm clouds. His face showed a few signs of wrinkles. He was also just as pale, if not paler than Tenten and Shino. Then again, what else could you expect from people who live down here? Kosuke stared at the young Uzumaki. As far as he could tell, the boy wasn't living in the tunnels with them. He was much too fit. From lack of food and water, he, Shino, and Tenten began to show effects of deterioration. Yet, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki looked as well as he'd ever been. In fact, there was something about the boy that almost felt intimidating to the old man. He didn't know why. He'd met powerful shinobi before. He served under 3 Hokage. He was used to seeing powerful, godly people, but this boy, something told him to submit himself. It was deeply concerning. It was possible because he was that man's son, but Kosuke somehow doubted it. Uzumaki Naruto. "And here I was hoping for a day where nothing goes on," Kosuke said as he took a can of hot water and sipped it. "You know me, old man?" the blonde asked. Kosuke laughed. "Indeed I do. I'd have to be living under a rock to not know you, Naruto-san. You made use of the Kyuubi's chakra in the Chunin exam. Quite the feat for such a young man. This little hut isn't much, but I welcome you," the eternal genin responded. The young genin's mouth thinned before he slowly nodded, somewhat perplexed by this situation. He was offered a seat. He took it graciously. Once he sat down, Shino closed the door and Tenten wasted no time explaining things. "Kosuke-san, listen to this. Naruto's not from the tunnels. He's been outside since the day the giant rock fell from the sky." She exclaimed a little too excitedly. The weapon user quickly composed herself while Kosuke frowned. The elderly man pulled his can from his lips. He wanted to appear hopeful, but like many others, even that seemed to be dwindling these days. "Is that true, Naruto-san?" Maruboshi asked. "Yeah." Shino and Tenten claimed the air's toxic, but I've been breathing the air since this all started. Nothing's happened to me. Nothing's happened to Ayame Nichan nor Kurenai-san, he answered. Kosuke scratched his chin. That was definitely odd. The air had to be toxic. That was the only explanation for what trapped them down here for so long. Could it have passed? That was possible, but the young genin claimed he'd been doing this since day one. That was the day people started dying and chaos ruptured through the streets of Konoha. Something wasn't adding up here. Perhaps a story might be best, the eternal genin said. Shino and Tenten sat down while Naruto began his tale. He talked about his week beneath the pile of logs, and how he made it back to Konoha. He talked about how he found his apartment, rescued Kurenai and Ayame. He spoke of the horrors he saw and the creatures he faced. Shino was particularly interested in the bugs the blonde encountered when he fell into that deep crevice. Tenten and Kosuke were worried about that thing he encountered at the Chunin exam stadium. To hear of Tsuki's demise saddened Kosuke. The man was a dear friend. When Naruto was done, the others processed what he'd told them. He had chosen to leave a few things out, such as how he'd taken care of Ayame and Kurenai, his training, and the green chakra. That said, it wasn't like Naruto didn't trust Shino. He was a good friend. A weird friend, but a good one. He didn't know much about Tenten, and he'd never heard of this old man before. Strong genin or not, he wasn't taking any chances. I see. Sounds like you've had a rough time. So that's why it's been getting colder down here. It's started snowing. By your own words, the snow is alive? He asked. Naruto nodded. He knew it sounded ridiculous, but snow didn't act like that. While the trio thought on the matter, Naruto grabbed his backpack. I don't have a lot of food on me, but I can at least give you guys what I didn't eat or drink, he said. He handed Shino a half-eaten bag of chips and 2.5 bars of granola to Tenten. He also gave Kosuke 2 bottles of water. It wasn't much, but for the three who only saw food sparingly, it might as well have been gold. Thank you, Naruto. Tenten lowly sobbed as she ate. Shino offered his thanks as well and partook of the chips while Kosuke began dividing up the water. Well, it certainly held true that the blonde had been up there. Bottled water, chips, and granola weren't seen down in these tunnels. He had to have gotten them from the surface, but how? Naruto watched Kosuke, Shino, and Tenten eat. Though there was barely anything, they still shared amongst each other. As he expected, it wasn't long before they ran out of everything he provided. That tasted so good. It might as well have been a 5-course meal, Tenten sighed happily. Kosuke laughed while Shino faced forward. The group fell into silence for a moment before Maruboshi cleared his throat. Well, thank you for the gifts, Naruto-san. So I assume Kurenai helped you with opening the sealed door? Kosuke asked. Why yeah, Naruto lied. It was a lie that the eternal genin effortlessly caught, but he didn't push it. He'd noticed some of the blonde's behavior but didn't address it. He had no idea why Naruto would lie. I see. Well then, I suggest we all head for the Anbu headquarters. I've disabled the traps there long ago. We can camp out there until the snow stops. Then we can test if Naruto-san really can go outside. If he can, then we'll try as well. Who knows, we might actually be in the clear, Maruboshi said. Shino leaned forward. What if he can and we can't? He asked. Everyone was silent for a moment before Naruto spoke. He took out his map and showed them all the places he had marked. My apartment is right here. If it's stopped snowing, then I'm heading straight there. To be honest, I was looking for another place to stay with them. We settled on these tunnels anyway. We'll run your tests, but if I can go and you can't, then I'm just going to grab them and run back here. Kurenai is still sick. I'll run them here as fast as possible. Then I'll run back out and try to grab what I can from the other apartment rooms. That's where all the stuff I've stored is, he said. Tenten slowly nodded. And you've been communicating to them with this headset. I guess the snow cut off the connection, or maybe it was the tunnels themselves. Plus, being down here doesn't help, she said. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki agreed. That certainly complicates matters. If Naruto's the only one who can survive up there, then we'll have to rely on him for finding supplies. Yet, you said you carried Kurenai and Ayame back to your apartment and they were fine. He asked. Naruto swiftly nodded. Well, yeah. Though, I guess when I saw them neither of them was outside. Kurenai-san was in a house and Ayame Nichan was in the basement levels of the Chunin exam stadium where that thing was. But yeah, nothing happened to them when I got them, he said. The other sat on the floor utterly confused. There had to be something that they weren't seeing. Absently, Naruto wondered if it was because of his green chakra. Maybe he'd been using that to keep himself alive and them as well. Yet, how was that possible? He hadn't accessed it in the week or two following the time before he found Ayame or Kurenai. He breathed just fine all those times. What was going on? Suddenly, Kosuke clapped. All right. Based on the map, it seems Naruto-san's telling the truth, but you know what they say. Seeing is believing. Shino-kun, Tenten-chan, if you're both fit enough then we'll quickly move to the Anbu headquarters. There is a room where we can perfectly view everything on the mountain ridge past where the Hokage stone faces used to be, the elderly shinobi said. The young Kunoichi nodded. Yeah, I'm down to go. That was the first decent meal I've had in weeks. Not passing this up, she said. Shino also agreed. Neither am I. This will be an enlightening experience, he said. Kosuke smiled and patted his legs. Well, I think we're all for a vote. Then let's collect what we need and escort Naruto-san to his destination. The elderly man said. Tenten and Shino eagerly agreed. While Naruto packed his bag, he felt a hand on his shoulder. When he turned, he noticed the eternal genin staring down at him with an odd smile. It unnerved the young man a little. Neither spoke a word until the older man released his hand and walked out of the room, leaving the Kyuubi Jinchuriki confused. Once Naruto finished packing, he walked out the door. He noticed them waiting for him. Apparently, they didn't have much to pack. Watch your step, Naruto. We had several traps down here. Though we never spotted anything, you can't be too careful, she said. He nodded. All right. Lead the way then, he said. The three nodded and before long, Naruto found himself being guided by his two friends and their mysterious leader. The trip wasn't anything spectacular. It involved a lot of walking and a lot of climbing up ladders. Even though they were deep beneath the ground, Naruto could hear the sounds of the blizzard outside. The ladders creaked and each step echoed eerily. He worried for Ayame and Kurenai. He wouldn't be able to live with himself if he failed to protect them. If he ever met Tsuki again, how would he explain to him that he failed to protect his daughter? The young Uzumaki tried not to think about these things too much. He just had to hope and pray that they'd be fine until he returned. Well, he was never much for praying even before all this shit started. Shino, if you don't mind me asking, what happened to your Aburame bugs? Kurenai and I haven't been able to gather chakra for a long time now. I assume it's the same for you, so what's going on? Naruto asked curiously as he, Shino, Tenten, and Kosuke climbed up another bunker ladder. The Aburame and Kikaichu are very understanding of one another. If you're worried that they'll start feasting on me, then don't be. I've merely asked them to go into diapause, he replied. Dino, what now? The blonde asked. He thought he heard a laugh from below. Diapause, Naruto. Some insects, When it's cold, go into diapause to survive cold weather or winter months. The Kikaichu are in diapause, an unmoving state until I find some means of recovering my chakra for them to feast on. I hope I find a way because they'll die if I keep them like that for too long, the Aburame here replied. The blonde genin slowly nodded as they continued climbing. Should he tell Shino he'd eaten some bugs to survive while under those logs? No. Hell no. After about an hour, Naruto figured they were along the side of the mountain because the tunnel started to curve upwards. Constantly, the group of four was surrounded by darkness. The journey up was made through creaking metal, but finally, they all were rewarded. Kosuke led the three genin to a separate set of hallways. In those hallways laid a black door that had been torn off its hinges. A staircase led upwards. The group ventured forward and it wasn't long before the elderly genin grabbed another door handle and pushed it open. They all walked through. Naruto noticed they were all in what could only be described as an office of sorts. A very trashed office at that. A broken desk, cracked lamps, shattered floorboards, and a torn carpet all laid there. Tenten kicked a fallen glass jar to the side. It rolled to where no one would find it again. Not very put together, is it? Naruto asked. Tenten grunted. Trust us. It looked better before we had to break down the floorboards and wooden shelves for firewood, she replied. Meanwhile, Naruto turned his head to one of the open windows. He didn't know what part of the Anbu headquarters they were in. Hell, he didn't even know there was one until just a few moments ago. When he got there, he and the others stared out at the snowfall. Even the pieces that landed on the window started to stitch themselves together. It probably wouldn't be long before they cracked the window and got inside. A breath to calm himself, Naruto stared out into the world. All was covered in snow and he watched as that snow, like some strange virus, clung together and scaled the sides of buildings. Some had accumulated so much snow that they were crushed beneath their own weight. Clearly, the more snow fell, the more and more it stuck together, the heavier it got. When it got too heavy, it would break down homes and shelters, taking anyone alive in them. The young man felt his hands shake. His apartment was already in bad shape before the snow. Could it stand against all this other stuff? What is that? Tenten asked as she stared at the window. Shino and Kosuke stared out as well. They all saw what Naruto saw. They watched the snowflakes string themselves together. Like thousands of parasitic vermin, they latched together intent on conquering all they touched. That's what nearly got me, Dadbeo. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki replied. The three gasped. How had the world changed in so short a time? It was like a horror movie gone wrong. Now they understood what Naruto meant when he said the snow was alive. How could snow and ice even move like this? Board up the windows as best you can. We can't have this stuff getting inside, Maruboshi said. The Kunoichi of Team Guy and Genin of Team 8 agreed. They grabbed one of the bookshelves and pushed it to the window. While that wouldn't do much, it was all they had. Great. So how are we supposed to test Naruto now? We can't send him out in that. Tenten exclaimed. Kosuke frowned and scratched his chin. Tenten was right. Whether Naruto could survive out there normally wasn't the problem. Clearly, he couldn't survive now. Plus, from the way all of this was spreading, it wouldn't be long before it covered most of the village. Plus, how long would it take before this snow started to melt? Though the Eternal Genin didn't like the thought, they might have to say goodbye to the Anbu headquarters as well. Wait, I have an idea, Naruto suddenly said. Tenten looked stunned. You have an idea? She questioned. A glare was met for her troubles. The weapon Kunoichi didn't know why, but she felt a shiver run through her spine at his gaze. It made her feel like just maybe she said the wrong thing. She didn't remember the last time she'd felt so terrified. Hell, She'd been on C and B rank missions before. Yet, none of them felt like what she felt now. Was it his chakra that she felt? She didn't think so. It was something more. The kunoichi cleared her throat and wisely decided to keep her comments to herself. Naruto leaned against the wall near the window and turned on his radio. Ayame Nichan, Kurenai-san, do you read me? He asked. The three widened their eyes. He had a radio. It was hard to tell in the dark of the tunnels. Plus, the room they were in didn't offer much light, but they could all make out a working radio and headset on his head. The four waited silently. Naruto felt his heart grow heavy as another structure fell to its knees not far off. The cold wind was a cruel howl in his ears. Ayame Nichan, Kurenai-san, do you read me? He asked, a bit more urgently this time. Naruto-kun. Oh, thank Kami. We've tried to radio you for the past 2 hours. Are you alright? Ayame asked. Naruto inhaled and exhaled. He chuckled happily and his fist knocked against the wall. Yeah, I'm fine. Listen, I've got some good news. I've met up with a few people. Shino, Tenten, and a man named Kosuke. We're here in the Anbu headquarters, the blonde spoke proudly. You meet Shino. Shino's alive, a soft voice asked. No doubt. Naruto knew that to be the genjutsu mistress on the other line. Yeah, hang on, Naruto said. He then took off his headset and handed it to Shino. He pointed at it with the widest grin on his face. The Aburame stared at the headset, but took it all the same. He placed it on his head. Hello, he called. Shino. Thank Kami, you're alive. It's good to hear your voice. Kurenai said on the other side. The Aburame heir never thought himself as emotional. Yet, not even he couldn't help lifting up his glasses and rubbing his eyes. It's good to hear you as well, Kurenai-sensei. Are you alright? Shino asked. He heard a cough on the other line. I'm doing fine, she replied. As much as Naruto wanted this lovely reunion to continue, he couldn't. He asked for the headset. Ayame Nichan, how is the apartment doing? He asked. There was a pause on the line. Bad, Naruto-kun. One of the rooms collapses because of all the snow. When I checked, the snow somehow began cracking the walls. It broke inside and shifted the complex. It won't be long until it falls. I think we're blessed we've got this long. NN Naruto, the snow is breaking into the living room. It's so cold, the snow is turning into ice. The ice forms place blades of diamond and stabs through the window. I'm scared to go to sleep. I don't think we'll last even 2 more days, she said. Naruto scowled, but he kept his mind clear. He looked at his 3 companions. He sighed. Ayame Nichan, gather everything together that you can. Put on any comforting and covering clothes that you can find. Use the towels and bed sheets if you've got to. I don't care. I'm coming to get you both. He stated strongly. What? No, it's too dangerous, Naruto-kun. We could be too far from. Don't argue with me, Ayame Nichan. I'm not letting you both die. Just be prepared to leave. Naruto said as he took off his headset and handed it to Kosuke. Stay on the line with them. Take me to the front door of this place, he said. Kosuke looked at the young genin. When was the last time he'd seen such a ferocious, commanding fire in eyes like those? Between the chaos that seemed to rule over lesser minds, his mind remained clear and his goals strong. The eternal genin couldn't help feeling impressed and surprised. There were many points he could have argued, but he couldn't bring himself to speak them. Follow me, Kosuke said. They followed him and Naruto ripped off the many curtains, drapes, and anything else he could find. He wrapped them around himself and tasked Tenten and Shino with gathering any firewood that they could. The 2 obeyed without complaint. They broke down the wood from some desks and took some wooden swords from the armor. Naruto, what's your plan? Tenten asked. I'm going to go get them, he replied. The kunoichi snorted. Yeah, thanks. We got that, but what are you going to? She stopped as they all came to the front of the building. Naruto ordered them to drop the wood in the center of the reception area. Yes, apparently the Anbu headquarters had a reception area. Don't ask him why. Naruto stared out into the intense blizzard. He placed his goggles over his eyes. He then reached into his backpack and pulled out some matches. Alright, put the wood in here on the floor. I'll set it on fire. Whatever you do, keep it hot, he said. Slowly, Kosuke realized where the blonde was going with this. It was rather unorthodox, but it would definitely work. Though the snow and ice were still fearsome outside, at the end of the day, it was still snow and ice. It was the natural enemy of fire. But can you even find your apartment in this storm? Tenten asked. Naruto snorted. Please, I once found my way home blindfolded, he boasted before he tore off a piece of cloth and wrapped it around his mouth. The rest of the curtains, drapes, and torn carpets he found were tied around his body. His arms, his legs, and his face were all protected. That said, he wondered how long it would stay this way. Alright, I'm as covered as I'm gonna get. Close the door as soon as I'm out. Stay close to the fire, the young genin said. The three nodded. He then grabbed the door hands. Even with his hands covered, they still felt cold. He shivered when he stared at the thousands of snow flurries rushing outside. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki inhaled and exhaled again. He summoned the green chakra in his body and used it on his arms, legs, lungs, and heart. It was rather hard to control so many areas, but he needed to. If he was going to have any hope of getting to them and them all returning alive, then he'd have to push himself. For them, he'd do it. Naruto pulled the doors open. The frozen winds blasted in his face, but he didn't care. He ate in his legs. Tenten, Kosuke, and Shino stood stunned as the ground beneath his feet cracked. Then, he dashed out with all the force he could put behind his steps. A blast of broken tile from the floor ruptured in their faces as he leapt into the air. Though shocked, they quickly grabbed the doors and closed them. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki felt the snow cling to his clothes as he sailed through the air. He landed on a rooftop. It was cold. It was so very cold. His body already felt heavier. No doubt the snow was stitching together, ready to overtake him if he stayed. He jumped off the building's snow-covered rooftop, snow stretching together beneath his boot. Naruto ran and ran and ran. He ran so hard his lungs burned. He wouldn't let it happen. He wouldn't let them die. He'd seen enough death to last a lifetime. If he could help it, he couldn't stand the thought of losing anyone else. He knew it might break him down if it did. As the young genin landed on another rooftop, he lifted up his leg, but it was stuck. He looked down. The snow was beginning to crawl from the rooftops and onto his boot. He forced the green chakra to move him. He leapt into the air and continued dashing to the southeast. Though the winds were fierce, his determination was fiercer. Naruto panted as he felt his covering get stronger still. How much snow had accumulated on his body? He'd rather not count. It would just distract him. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki zoomed in on his apartment. As he had trained with his green chakra, it powered him to run as far and as fast as he could. He already knew that when he would stop using it, the pain would be excruciating. However, when he remembered Tsuki's dying body, Hinata's eyeless face, and the corpses of Kiba and Lee, he knew that the pain, if he failed, would be much worse. As Ayame said, the snow was beginning to crack through the brittle walls. It wouldn't be long before his home was sent crashing down just like everything else. Naruto landed on his rooftop. He then kicked his door down. They wouldn't be coming back here anyway. It was time to say goodbye. Kurenai and Ayame jumped out of their skin as they saw Naruto standing there, his body covered in so much snow and crawling ice. They wondered how he was even standing. Naruto-kun, Ayame said before the blonde moved. I'll take Kurenai-san first since she's the most vulnerable. I swear I'll be back for you, Ayame-ni-chan. He exclaimed. He tore off the curtains and drapes he'd been using. He then grabbed the shower rake he was using to block the windows. He covered himself with that. Kurenai gasped as she felt Naruto picked her up in his arms. Before the Jonin could speak, he dashed out of the window with her in his arms. The Genjutsu mistress held her arms around his neck as he protected her from the snow and ice. Her breath was cold, but she found his body to be rather warm and filled with mysterious, yet comforting power. Her face buried in his neck as the harsh winds buffeted against them. The added weight of Kurenai wasn't easy to hold, but Naruto did it anyway. He made it back to the Anbu headquarters. Honestly, it took longer than he thought. The way up was much harder than the way down. He kicked the doors open. Tenten, Kosuke, and Shino gasped as Naruto set Kurenai down near the fire. The snow quickly began to melt while she looked at the three in surprise. Her eyes landed on Shino and his landed on his teacher. Forgive Kurenai if she was a bit overwhelmed, but she hugged her student and turned her head to thank her savior, but he was already gone. The indents on the floor were the only thing that indicated that he had been there. Naruto growled as he felt the snow cover one of his arms. His goggles were also getting covered with the stuff. He wiped it off with his arm, but he knew the snow would only start accumulating there. One of his legs had been covered with snow and ice as well. It made it very hard to move. Finally, Naruto made it back to his apartment. Ayame smiled at him while he took off more of the curtains, drapes, and carpets he'd used for a makeshift coat. His shower curtains had already been destroyed and claimed by the deadly weather outside. Instead, he grabbed the sheets from his bed and some of his spare futon stuff. He grabbed the curtains from his bedroom. The young Uzumaki's mind was racing like a thrown kunai. Everything seemed so clear, yet so muddy. To be honest, he thought he was moving on instinct at the least. While he was thinking about the goals to be done, he was already doing them. He grabbed however many storage scrolls he had and began sealing all the shit he had looted from the other rooms. He sealed the water, food, clothes, medicine supplies, bathroom supplies, mattresses, sheets, pots, and anything else of value that everyone could use in this slowly dying world they all lived in. By the time he was done, he had a backpack full of scrolls. Once that was done, he appeared in front of Ayame. The ramen waitress wouldn't deny it. Naruto looked so gallant in her eyes. He was like a living, breathing hero that stood before her. He really came back for them. Just like back at the Chunin exam stadium, he rescued her once again. The brunette didn't know why, but her heart leapt in droves. Trust me? Naruto asked. His hand reached out. Always, Naruto-kun, Ayame said as she took his hand. He picked her up in his arms. She felt safe there. She couldn't stop the smile on her face. There was a pang of sadness when she saw how empty his apartment was. Just like everything else, it too would be gone with time. Naruto ed in his legs and dashed back into the storm. Ayame shivered in his embrace as the snow continued to cling to them both. Ayame brushed off what she could with her gloves, but it didn't matter. It quickly started to accumulate and crawl on her, ready to devour her and her Naruto, her blonde, heroic savior at a moment's notice. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki kicked open the doors to the Anbu headquarters. Kosuke and Tenten heaved as they closed the door and placed 5 blocks of wood against the handles. Everyone stared at Naruto. His body was covered by the snow. Thousands of stringy ice knitted themselves together like a coming virus. One of the goggles, eyepieces had been completely frosted. One of his legs was being consumed. Yet, he did it. He saved both Ayame and Kurenai. Quickly, get some fire on him, Kosuke said as Naruto slowly put Ayame down. He smiled at her and she smiled back as the others placed burning wood on his clothes. The snow quickly stopped its expanse. It melted off his body. His back felt so much lighter, and wetter. His leg was freed from its frozen prison and the snow on his arm merely dissolved into the fabric on his clothes. In no time, Naruto was also saved from the predatory elements as he allowed the green chakra to fade. Arg! Naruto groaned as he fell to his knees and clutched his legs and arms. Naruto. Naruto-kun, what's wrong? Ayame asked. She got up instantly and went over to him as he writhed in pain. He couldn't answer her. The pain was too unbearable. The strain he'd placed on his legs by pushing both his body and his chakra was immense. His muscles tightened and his innards burned. Yet, he was happy. He was happy to take this pain. It was the penalty for the victory he'd awarded himself. For the next hour, Ayame comforted Naruto as his body tortured him for what he put it through. She and the others grew considered when he spat blood on the floor. However, once that hour was over, they could all breathe easy when his pains halted. His head rested on Ayame's lap. His eyes fluttered. Is everyone alright? He asked. Ayame wiped her eyes. Yes, Naruto-kun. You saved us. You saved all of us, she replied. He smiled as he leaned his head back. Well, I guess that proves whether he can go outside or not, Tenten remarked more to herself than the others. Yet, they heard her. Shino quickly agreed. Yes. Ayame-san and Kurenai-sensei were the same. They could survive outside as well, the bug wielder replied. Maybe that means we can go outside too, after it stops snowing, she said. The others quickly agreed. Ayame used a torn piece of curtain to rub down Naruto's forehead. He'd been sweating quite a bit since his pain subsided. She took off his backpack and tossed it to the side. So you've all been living in the tunnel system designed by Sandaime-sama for a month? She asked. Indeed. However, I'm more intrigued by Naruto-san. He managed to run from the Anbu headquarters to his apartment in the southeast quadrant of the village in under 6 minutes. Even most Jonin would need 10 minutes to make it that far. How did he get over there so fast? Kosuke asked. Unfortunately, the only person who could answer that question was currently resting on Ayame's lap near the small fire pit Tenten and Shino made. They looked at him as he slept. After about an hour passed, Naruto opened his eyes. Glad you're awake, Naruto-kun, Ayame said with a welcoming smile. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki slowly leaned up and rubbed his head. He noticed he passed out just in front of the door where the freezing blizzard raged. How long was I asleep? He asked. About an hour, Ayame answered. Naruto rubbed his neck and stared at his bag. Everyone surrounded him. Alright, let's get away from the doors. Kurenai-san is still sick. I also got everything from my apartment. We'll need to sort everything in the tunnels, he claimed. Shouldn't Kurenai-sensei be telling us our next plans? She's the highest ranked official here, Tenten said. She didn't think what Naruto said was a bad thing, but she did think the Jonin should be the one leading the effort. The Genjutsu mistress sighed. Listen to Naruto. I'm not in the condition to lead anyone. Besides, he's the one who knows the most about the situation outside. I also hate to admit it, but out of all of us, he's the only protector we've got right now. We'll have to see what happens when I feel better, but if your stories are anything to go by, then there's a reason you three weren't able to go to the surface. If the same does apply to Ayame and myself, then Naruto's our only hope of surviving, the black-haired woman said. Tenten opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I second your idea, Kurenai-san. Until this blizzard blows over and we can truly test if Shino-kun, Tenten-chan, and myself can weather the environment, Naruto is all we have, Maruboshi suddenly said. Everyone turned to Naruto and suddenly the blonde felt a little out of his element. Everyone looked to him, ready to follow whatever he said. It was a rather nice feeling, if an uncomfortable one. He cleared his throat and stood to his feet. He wobbled a moment and felt a little dizzy, but with Ayame's help he stood straight. All right, Kurenai-san, can you walk? He asked. The Jonin nodded. He nodded back to her. All right, Kosuke-san, lead us back through the tunnels. Once we're back there, I'll start rationing everything. Ayame-san, Kurenai-san, and Kosuke-san can help with that. Tenten, Shino, gather all the wood and any burnables that you can up here. That fire isn't gonna last forever and I bet the window's gonna break from the ice outside. Probably won't be long until this place is overrun too, Dadbeo, he remarked. Everyone agreed. Kosuke helped Kurenai while Tenten and Shino started collecting what they could. Ayame helped Naruto to his feet. He grabbed his backpack and everyone began their trek back to the tunnels. They left the burning fire there. With any luck, it would keep the ice at bay for a little bit before it went out. In the back of Naruto's mind, he wondered if the snow would last so long that it would reach the tunnels. He'd have to keep an eye on that. If it did, then it was likely to grow in places with no heat to burn it away. If they weren't careful, then even the tunnels wouldn't be safe. Truth be told, Naruto was running out of options. The group of 6 went back the way they came and entered the tunnels. Kosuke pulled the bookshelf back against the walls and closed the door behind them. Kurenai walked a bit unsteadily, but she kept up with everyone. By the time they returned, everyone was a bit exhausted. Kosuke opened the door to the underground bunker area for the group. Ayame and Kurenai surveyed the living conditions. Just as both thought, it looked worse than they had envisioned. Just like Naruto, they heard the story of how Tenten, Shino, and Kosuke got down here. It wasn't a great tale. Everyone sat in the resting area. Ayame gently laid Naruto down while he lowered his backpack. The barrels of fire provided little light, but Tenten tossed some of the wood they'd gotten into them. She stoked the flames and they got a lot brighter and a lot warmer. Naruto opened the flap of his backpack and everyone noticed the numerous scrolls stuffed in them. All right, first things first, Naruto said as he unfurled the first scroll. Out came various bottles of medicine, pills, and other supplies related to the medical field. He picked up one of the medicine vials. This one's good for every 6 hours. Helps with cough, sickness, and sore throat. This'll do, he thought. He then handed the vial to Kurenai. This'll be your medicine now since the other vial ran out. Take it every 6 hours, he stated. Kurenai took the medicine from him and looked it over. Once she inspected it, she took her first dose. Once Kurenai's needs were met, Naruto began unsealing all the scrolls he'd used. Kosuke, Tenten, and Shino were stunned at the jugs of water, boxes, and crates filled with canned and packaged food, along with various clothes. The young Kunoichi gawked when she saw the female undergarments. She glared at Naruto, but he merely shrugged. Hey, if she wanted to complain then she could go without them. What did it matter to him? Ayame Nichan told me we were getting low on water, so try not to drink it all. I'll need to find a way to go back out if the blizzard doesn't stop. Ayame Nichan, make a list of all I've collected. Kosuke-san, keep an eye on all the things everyone takes. Shino, Tenten, and I will make space for all this stuff. As for Kurenai-san, she needs as much rest as she can get, he said. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki unsealed his mattress and the sheets and covers. Kurenai would have wanted to complain, but one look in the blonde's eyes and she had no fight to give. Instead, she just crawled on the mattress, next to the fire pits, and fell asleep. So, per Naruto's orders, everyone got to work. Ayame made a quick tally of everything the group had on a table the blonde also unsealed. She worked closely with Kosuke as Shino and Tenten were allowed food and bentos from the boxes unsealed. Meanwhile, the three genin moved most of the boxes to another room that wasn't being used. They also strung up a set of 5 candles in 4 tunnel hallways for light. As night fell over Konoha and the tunnels became colder, Tenten, Shino, and Kosuke ate like they never ate before. Ayame and Naruto watched the three eat like they never ate before. By the time they were done, Naruto had to wonder if he should jot down more places on his map for food. Clearly, having double the number of people wasn't going to cut it anymore. Of course, once the dinner was sorted, Kosuke spent some time working out what they had all eaten, drank, and used to wash up. He informed Ayame and Ayame in turn informed Naruto of the list. Between all the moving around, everyone became very tired. The sleeping arrangements were made. Naruto, Kosuke, and Shino were in one room. Tenten, Ayame, and Kurenai were in the other. However, that arrangement wouldn't last for very long. Late into the night, Ayame tossed and turned. She couldn't go back to sleep. She'd gotten used to having Naruto next to her. Having him by her side comforted her. She hadn't said it, but she'd been a nervous wreck when they lost communication. She'd assumed the worst. Thoughts that she didn't want to entertain kept coming into her head. She couldn't take them. Even now, they continued so much that she started to sweat. Call her weak if you must, but she couldn't live like this. So Ayame picked up her pillow and sheets. She walked over to the men's door and gently knocked on it. Naruto-kun, she asked as she opened the door. She stepped through and rubbed his shoulder. The blonde opened his eyes. What is it, Ayame-ni-chan? He asked tiredly. Ayame blushed and grabbed his arm. She pulled him out of the room. Though he was tired, it didn't take him long to realize what was going on. They walked to another room. Naruto lit a few candles while Ayame laid out another futon and some sheets. Both slipped into the bed. Now that he was awake, Naruto reached under his shirt and pulled out his journal. He felt Ayame wrap her arms around his waist. She smelled good. Not again. He whined to himself before he pulled out a pen. Naruto's log, day 34. A lot's happened. I've met with Shino and Tenten. They're led by this guy who's called the Eternal Genin. His name is Kosuke Maruboshi. That smile on his face creeps me out sometimes, but Shino and Tenten seem to like him, I guess. He also appears to have the respect of Kurenai-san. He must be powerful if he's that old and still a shinobi. I also saved Ayame-ni-chan and Kurenai-san from my apartment. I'd rather not tell them I can't feel my legs right now. Every step I took today was painful. We distributed the food and other supplies. Currently, I'm the only one who can loot the village. I hope Kurenai-san gets well soon. I'll also have to bring up the topic of us leaving Konoha. All this stuff is going to run out eventually. That said, I don't know where we would go. Is any place even safe anymore? Is anyone else out there? Can I protect everyone here? I don't even know the answers to those questions. Everyone looks to me for answers. This must be that burden of leadership stuff Kakashi-sensei always talked about. Kakashi-sensei, I wonder if he's even alive too. Maybe he's gone just like everyone else. I probably should have paid more attention to his lessons. I hope I'm doing the right thing. Naruto finished writing. He closed his journal and eased himself into the sheets. Ayame hugged his body and smiled while she dreamed sweet dreams. Soon, Naruto closed his eyes as well. The blizzard outside lulled him to sleep. Though it was deadly, and a cold knot of his normal world, he still found it peaceful to listen to. Soon, Uzumaki Naruto was carried off to sleep as well.